May 23rd, 1618, the Prague Castle. 3 men are thrown out of a third floor window. They fall 21 meters, roughly 70 feet, on the ground below. All 3 survive, and that near miss, that moment of spectacular failure, triggered a war that lasted 30 years, killed 8 million of people, and permanently restructured the map of Europe. The event is called the defenestration of the Prague. Defenestration. It means throwing someone out of a window. The fact that this happens often enough in Prague that they needed a specific word for it should tell you something about the city. To understand why throwing 3 men out of a window started a 30-year war, you need to understand what Europe looks like in 1618. The Protestant Reformation had happened 100 years earlier. Martin Luther 95 Theses. The Catholic Church split down in the middle. You probably know the broad strokes. What you might not know is that by 1618, Europe had spent a century unsuccessfully trying to manage the fallout. Catholic kingdoms versus Protestant kingdoms, Catholic emperors trying to control Protestant subjects, Protestant nobles trying to protect the rights that Catholic rulers kept quietly eroding. The Holy Roman Empire, which covered most of the Central Europe and neither was Holy Roman nor an empire in any coherent sense, had established a fragile peace in 1555 called the Peace of Augsburg. The basic rule: each prince could choose the religion of his territory. Catholic lands stay Catholic, Protestant lands stay Protestant, everyone stops killing each other. It worked mostly for about 60 years. Then the Habsburgs, the Catholic dynasty that run the Holy Roman Empire, decided they wanted Bohemia back. Bohemia, modern day Czech Republic, was majority Protestant, had been for a century. They had a formal document, the Letter of Majesty, signed in 1609, guaranteeing their right to worship freely and build Protestant churches wherever they wanted. The new Habsburg King Ferdinand, deeply aggressive Catholic, looked at the document and decided it was more of a suggestion. In 1617, he ordered 2 Protestant churches demolished. Churches that had been built legally on a land the Protestant claimed was theirs. The Bohemian Protestant called an emergency assembly. They were furious. They sent petition to the emperor demanding he reverse the order. The emperor's officials responded by telling them the assembly itself was illegal and should be dissolved immediately. The Bohemian nobles read that letter carefully and then they made a decision. On the morning of May 23rd, 1618, a delegation of about 100 Protestant noblemen marched into Prague Castle. They were armed, they were angry, and they had a very specific plan. They found a room when the emperor's 4 royal governors were sitting. They burst in and they immediately started identifying which of the 4 governors were the worst offenders, the most aggressively Catholic, the most actively involved in stripping Protestant rights. They settled on 2, Yaroslav of Martinitz and Wilhelm Slavata, both Catholic, both deeply unpopular, both had been enthusiastically implementing Ferdinand's anti-Protestant policies. The nobles put them on trial right there in a room, a mock trial. Accusations read aloud, defense ignored, verdict delivered in minutes. Guilty. And then, in deliberate callback to a previous rebellion 200 years earlier when Prague had done exactly the same thing, they carried out a sentence. They threw them out of a window. Both men, plus their unfortunate secretary and man named Fabricius was simply in the wrong room at the wrong time, were grabbed, dragged to the window and thrown out. 21 meters, roughly the height of a 6-story building. 3 men thrown from the castle window into rocky moat below. All 3 survived. How? Adjacent to the wing of the castle where the defenestration took place was a large courtyard used for indoor equestrian events, which meant the ground below the window was not bare stone. It was, and I want you to appreciate the historical significance what I'm about to say, it was very large pile of horse manure. Martinez landed in it, Slavata landed in it, Fabricius landed in it. All 3 men men survived with relatively minor injuries, scrambled out of a dung heap and fled immediately to Vienna to report what had happened to the absolutely furious Emperor Ferdinand. Now here's where the spin begins, because both sides immediately recognized that the optics of this event were going to shape everything that came after. The Catholics put out pamphlets within days claiming that angels had descended from the heavens and carried the men safely to the ground. Divine intervention. God himself had protected his faithful servants from Protestant violence. The Protestants put their own pamphlets pointing out in rather blunt terms exactly what had happened. No angels, just manure. The Catholic PR machine won the short-term narrative battle. The story of miraculous survival spread across Catholic Europe and became a rallying cry. But the Protestants won the war for Bohemian public opinion. Either way, none of it mattered because the war had already started. Within hours of the defenestration, the Protestant estates of Bohemia began mobilizing the army. Within months, the conflict had spread beyond Bohemia into the surrounding territories. Within 2 years, it had become a pan-European catastrophe involving the Holy Roman Empire, France, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, the Dutch Republic, and virtually every other significant power on the continent. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. Here's what it actually meant in human terms. 8 million people dead. Some estimates go higher. Mostly civilians, not from battles, but from famine, disease, the systemic destruction of farmland and villages that was standard military practice at the time. Germany lost a third of its entire population. Some regions lost half. Entire cities were burned to the ground. Villages were erased. The German-speaking world didn't recover demographically for a century. The war produced some of the most extreme violence in European history up to that point. Armies that couldn't be paid would simply loot. A city that didn't surrender fast enough got sacked. Soldiers who ran out of the food ate whatever they could find, including in document cases, things I won't describe in detail. Contemporary accounts describe a continent-wide collapse, not just of armies, not just of governments, of basic social order, of the idea that tomorrow would be safer than today, and at the center of it, religion argument that nobody could actually win militarily. Catholics couldn't permanently subjugate Protestants' populations. The Protestants couldn't permanently overthrow Catholic rule. Every military victory just meant the other side regrouped and came back. Every peace agreement fell apart within years. The war didn't end until both sides were simply too exhausted and destroyed to continue. In 1648, after 30 years, the Peace of Westphalia was signed. It is one of the most important documents in the history of international relations, and it basically said nobody wins, go back to where you were, keep your religion, stop killing each other. Every territorial gain made during 30 years of wars was largely reversed. The fundamental religious question that started the whole thing was settled roughly the same way it had been settled in 1555. Each ruler decides for its own territory. 8 million people died to return to a version of the agreement that had already existed before the defenestration. But Westphalia did something new. It established the principle that sovereign states had the right to conduct their internal affairs without outside interference. That no emperor, no pope, no outside power can dictate the internal religious or political arrangements of another state. This is considered the birth of the modern concept of national sovereignty, the foundational idea behind the nation-state system that still structures international relations today. Each time you hear about national sovereignty, every time you hear about non-interference in internal affairs, every time the UN debates whether one country has the right to intervene in another, you are dealing with the intellectual legacy of Westphalia, which itself is the legacy of 30 years of catastrophic war, which started because 3 men survived a fall into a dung heap. One last thing, Prague didn't stop defenestrating people in 1618. In 1948, 300 years later, a man named Jan Masaryk was found dead beneath the bathroom window of the foreign ministry building in Prague. He was the son of the founder of Czechoslovakia. He was the foreign minister. He was the last non-communist in the government. The Communist Party has just seized power in a coup. The official verdict was a suicide. Nobody believed it then, nobody believes it now. It was almost certainly murder, thrown from his own bathroom window by the new communist government that needed him gone. It's called the fourth defenestration of Prague. There is a reason the Czechs have a word for this. Here's what I keep coming back to with this story. The men who threw Martinic and Slavate out of the window thought they were making decisive statement, a show of force, a line in the sand. They had no idea what they were starting. They weren't trying to start a 30-year war. They were trying to protect their right to build churches. They were trying to push back against the government simply stripping their freedoms. And they succeeded technically. The specific religion grievances that started the conflict were eventually settled in the Protestants' favor. But the mechanism they chose to settle them cost 8 million lives and took 30 years. History full of moments like this. Someone throws 3 men out the window. Someone shoots an archduke. Someone says an ultimate they expect to be rejected. And the thing they set in motion is so much larger than anything they intended that it stops being their story at all. The defenestration of Prague stopped being about Bohemian religious right within months of happening. It became about empire, dynasty, survival and power. And the people who started it were marginal footnotes by the end. 3 men landed in a dung heap. 8 million people paid for it.